and there is no end in sight. In June, they kidnapped 3 teenagers, shot them to death, and buried their bodies in holes in the ground. Then they opened a war against us, shooting over 4,000 missiles towards our civilians. And since then, there is no day goes by, and Palestinians are stabbing Jews to death in a train station, in a bus stop, in synagogues. Terrorism in Israel did not come to a halt. And the reason is that the Palestinian terror organizations think that they finally found the key that will destroy the Jewish state and will drive us from our land. The governments of the Arab nations around us are pouring millions and millions of dollars into the hands of the Palestinian terror organizations in order to keep the pot boiling and to make sure that more and more Jewish life will be lost. When the Intifada broke out in the year of 2000, we in Shurat Hadin, Israel Law Center, decided that we cannot sit still and see the blood spilled on the streets. That we should use our legal skills to join the fight against the terrorism. It's not only for the government, it's not only for the military, it's also for the private sector to take a role in the game in the war against terrorism. So we decided to do what lawyers do best, go after the pocketbooks of the terror organizations. We understood that money is like the oxygen to the terror organizations, that no terror organization can continue without funding. So we asked for a meeting with the Israeli Mossad. I was invited to come to the Mossad headquarters in North Tel Aviv. I entered the building and went to the room, and they were sitting there, 3 big, wide-shouldered agents looking at me. And I said to them, okay, this is the idea. We are going to sue the terror organizations. We are going to file lawsuits against the states who sponsors them. Then we are going to get judgments against them. And then we will enforce the judgment against their assets. We are going to go after their bank accounts. We are going to block their funding. We are going to collect their assets everywhere. We are going to bankrupt them. And then there was a silence. And in the end, one of them looked at me and said, so what you're really gonna do? Wreck their credit rating? Not exactly. Because today, 15 years later, we are holding judgments against the terror organizations and their state sponsors, against banks that provide financial services to terror organizations, for the amount of $1.5 billion. We were able to put a lien on $600 million of terror assets, and we actually collected, we got into our hands more than $120 million that went to the terror victims. This is justice. In Shurat Hadin, we represent hundreds of terror victims in lawsuits against Hamas, Islamic Jihad, PLO, Hezbollah, Palestine Authority, against Iran, against Syria, against North Korea, against banks that provide financial services to terror organizations like Arab Bank, National Westminster, Credit Lyonnais, UBS, Lebanese Canadian Bank, American Express Bank, and Bank of China. And I would like to use this opportunity to tell you how we started and where we're going from here. The biggest bank in the Arab world called the Arab Bank. Not a very creative name, but that's its name. It's based in Jordan, it has branches all over the world, and it's got over $30 billion in assets. It's like the Citibank of the Arab world. During the Intifada, the Arab Bank ran a reward program in favor of the families of the suicide bombers, which went like this. If you were a father or a mother of a suicide bomber, if you were a child of a suicide bomber, you could have gone to the Hamas headquarters in Gaza, get a letter from them saying that you are a father, a mother, or a child of a suicide bomber. Take the letter to the branch of the Arab Bank in Gaza, show you the bank manager, and the bank manager will give you a reward of many thousands of dollars. Ads were published all over the Arab world. If you want to support your brothers in the Palestine Authority, if you want to help the Shahid, the martyrs, donate money to the specific bank account in Gaza. People in Saudi Arabia knew that if they donate money to a specific bank account in Gaza, they can go back home, sitting in their living rooms, watch Al Jazeera TV showing the ambulances taking away the bodies of the dead and the injured in Jerusalem. The Arab Bank could have continued with this reward program for many years, unless they made a little mistake. They ran this program by having a branch in New York. We saw that and realized that there is an American jurisdiction over the bank. Along with American attorneys, we filed a lawsuit against the Arab Bank on behalf of 50 families of terror victims that were killed or injured by Hamas, seeking over $5 billion compensation. The first thing the Arab Bank did was trying to close this branch in New York. The Congress didn't let them to do so. After a long negotiation, they had to freeze $450 million of their money in the United States. And then they didn't have a choice but to litigate the case. They hired one of the biggest law firms in the United States to represent them in court and filed motions to dismiss the case. But all of their motions were denied. The court ordered them to turn over into our hands all the documentations of the transaction that they did from the beginning of the Intifada. And there is a paper trail that proves that the Arab Bank gave money to the families of the suicide bombers knowingly and intentionally. We thought that the Arab Bank will compromise. Instead, he decided to go to trial. It was a jury trial. It opened in August 12 this year and ended 2 months ago, where the Arab Bank lost the case. We're done with liability. Now we have to prove damages. The damages are horrible. And let me tell you about one of them, Hannah Nachenberg and her family. Hannah Nachenberg is a young woman from New York who lives in Israel that in August 2001 decided to take her family to eat pizza in the Spreaker pizza place in Jerusalem. Shortly after she entered the restaurant, a suicide bomber from the Hamas, wearing explosive vests, entered the restaurant and blew himself up. Everybody remember the suicide bombing. Everybody remember the famous sign of the Spreaker pizza place lies down on the floor and around it all the dead and the injured. Everybody remember where it happened. It happened in the intersection between King George Street to Jaffa Street, the heart of the commercial district of Jerusalem. The same cell that was responsible for this suicide bombing was the one who blew up the Moment Cafe a while before, killing 18 young people, and the one that will blow up Hebrew University cafeteria a while later, ending up with the death of 7 young students. Hannah Nachenberg did not get killed in the attack. A metal pin entered her head and lined in her brain. She went into irreversible coma. She was hospitalized in the Darshan hospital in Jerusalem. And after many months, when the doctors saw there was no improvement in her situation, she was moved to a medical center in Israel. She is staying there until this day. Every day, her parents come to the hospital, sit in her bed, and pray. I've seen photos of Hannah's daughter, 5-year-old Sarah, dressed up in Purim costume, coming to show her mother how she dressed up in Purim that year. I've seen photos of Hannah's brother, dressed up in his tuxedo wedding suit, coming to show his sister how he'll dress up in his wedding day. Every single day, her parents come to the hospital, enter her room, sit near her bed, and pray. On behalf of Hannah Nachenberg and the rest of the families of the terror victims, we take the case against the Arab Bank until the end. Shortly after we filed this lawsuit, the Arab Bank immediately changed the way they're doing businesses. Not only the Arab Bank. This lawsuit sent a shockwave through the international banking system that no bank agreed anymore to open bank account to a designated terror organization like Hamas, Islamic Jihad, PLO, or Hezbollah. No bank agreed to provide financial services to Islamic charities that raise funds for designated terror organizations. And no bank agreed to provide financial services in terror zones like South Lebanon, like Gaza. There is no banking system in Gaza. This is why you see them smuggling money into Gaza with suitcases through the tunnels. And that caused Hamas a great deal of harm because they need to bring hundreds of millions of dollars into the Gaza Strip. They need this money first and foremost to support the population. The reason the population allowed Hamas in the recent war to use them as human shields, to send them to the top of the roofs to warn the IDF not to shoot missiles towards the buildings. The reason the population in Gaza allowed Hamas to shoot missiles towards Israel from their backyards, from their living rooms, from their kindergarten, from their hospitals, from their mosques, is because Hamas supports the population in Gaza and provides them with all services they need from cradle to grave for free. They give them free education, free medical services, free social services, free food in order to gain their loyalty, to continue carry out attacks against Israel from the civilian area. Hamas is military. They have tens of thousands of soldiers, sometimes wear uniforms, sometimes they don't, but they always get paid on a monthly basis. Hamas has thousands of prisoners who are sitting in the Israeli jail, which Hamas provides their families and gives them thousands of dollars every month. Depends how many years your son got in jail, according to how many Israelis he killed. And Hamas built these sophisticated tunnels. They used to come from Egypt into Israel to smuggle terrorists, money, ammunition. Today they're going from Gaza into Israel to send over terrorists to kill Israelis. To maintain all these operations, all this infrastructure, Hamas needs hundreds of millions of dollars. So Hamas ran into a problem. They needed a bank that will allow them to transfer money into Gaza. They could not do it only with suitcases through the tunnels. So after a lot of efforts, they found one. They found a bank that did not care about anti-money laundering laws, a bank that did not care about anti-terrorism law, a bank that thought that he is above the law. It's one of the biggest banks in the world. It's called the Bank of China. The Bank of China agreed to open bank account to a Hamas terrorist who was sitting in Beijing and receiving money from the headquarters of Hamas in Syria, hundreds of thousands of dollars each month for years. The money was going through the Bank of China in New York, hitting the account of Shurafa in Beijing, and Shurafa was pulling the money out at the same day and sending it to his brother and father, other Hamas terrorists in Gaza. The counter-terrorism division of the Israeli government went to China, met the Central Bank of China, and urged them to close down the account. They told them where the money is coming from and where the money is going. But the Chinese said that Hamas is not a designated organization in China. There is no violation of the Chinese law, and therefore they have no intention to close down the account. So we were asked if we can take the Chinese to court. And we agreed because this is what we like to do. I always say that Citibank has a slogan. We're trying to make banking easier. We have a slogan. We're trying to make banking much harder to the terrorists. So we gathered terror victims that were killed or injured by the missile attacks from Gaza into Sderot, into other southern communities of the country. We gathered the families of the children that were massacred in Merkaz Arav Yeshiva terror attack in Jerusalem. We gathered families that lost their loved ones in suicide bombings in Tel Aviv, in Eilat. We took all these hundreds of victims and filed a $1 billion lawsuit against Bank of China in New York. This lawsuit drove the Chinese crazy. It was right before the Olympic Games. They sent us warning letters telling us to stop talking about the lawsuit. They warned us that by connecting their name to terror financing, we are destroying their reputation, we are ruining their names. They threatened us with a libel suit against us in China and with a criminal prosecution against us in China. This is why none of us is going to China any day soon. Then they filed a motion to dismiss the case. They say that the case should be heard in China. The law that should apply should be the Chinese law. And in any event, we don't have any evidence to support the case. We filed a response. We brought experts that testified what happens to lawyers who dare to file a lawsuit against Bank of China in China. We alleged that the law that should apply should be the Israeli law. And we had a former Mossad agent that filed an affidavit in court testifying about the different meetings that Israelis had with the Chinese, how the Chinese knew that the money is going to Hamas. He gave examples of the wire transactions with the amounts, numbers of the accounts, dates, and we were able to win the motion to dismiss. The court ruled that the case will continue in New York. He applied the Israeli law and said that we have enough evidence to continue to discovery and deposition. At this stage, the Israeli government, who initiated the lawsuit, got pressured by China to obstruct any testimony and to stop helping us with the case. A major witness that was supposed to go on the witness stand was canceled because Israel got tremendous pressure by the Chinese government. So now we find ourselves ironically litigating against the state of Israel, in addition to litigating against Bank of China. But we will not stop. And we will fight the Bank of China until the end. Because our clients, the terror victims, fought until the bitter end. Ella Abukasis was only 17 years old when she was walking one Shabbat with her brother, 15 years old, going to the youth movement Bnei Akiva in Sderot, when the red alert went off. This is the alarm that goes on when the missiles are falling from Gaza. In Tel Aviv, you have 90 seconds to find a shelter. In Ashdod, you have 60 seconds to find a shelter. In Sderot, you have 15 seconds to find a shelter. So she was walking down the street. It was a bare street. There was no building, no bus stop to hide underneath them. The only thing that went into her mind is to protect her brother. She fell over her brother. She covered him. The missile fell right near their heads. Many straight nails went into their both heads. She fought for 7 days on her life in the hospital. She died. Her brother is disabled for life. We will not let them kill our children and keep silent. We will fight them back. cases we're litigating is cases against state-sponsored terrorism. Every time Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or Hezbollah carries out attacks, we file a lawsuit against Iran, or against Syria, or against North Korea in the Federal District Court of Washington. North Korea, you would ask what to do with the Middle East conflict. Well, North Korea sent agents to help Hezbollah to build the underground tunnels that facilitated Hezbollah to shoot missiles towards Israel in the Second Lebanese War. We had 50 terror victims that were killed or injured during the Second Lebanese War that filed a case against North Korea, and we got a judgment against them just last month. Syria comes to court. Syria hires a lawyer, an ex-Attorney General of the United States named Ramsey Clark. He comes to court and he has only one defense, that Syria is a sovereign state, they have sovereign immunity, and they cannot be sued in the American courts. However, the American Congress legislated a law, an exception for the Sovereign Immunity Act, saying that a state-sponsored terrorism is no longer acting as a sovereign state and therefore should not enjoy sovereign immunity. In cases of terrorists, state-sponsored terrorism does not enjoy sovereign immunity. We get the case done, we prove our damages, and we get judgment against Syria for hundreds of millions of dollars. Iran doesn't even bother to show up in court. And against Iran, we also gain hundreds of millions of dollars in judgments. And then comes the big question, how do you collect? So in the beginning, we found frozen bank accounts that belong to the Iranian government in the United States. We found an account that had $5 million. We wanted to collect the money, enforce our judgment against the account, but the State Department opposed us. The State Department didn't want the money to go to the terror victims. They wanted to have a say what to do with the money. They wanted to keep the money for the day that they have new relations with Iran. So we hired a lobbyist. We hired the former Undersecretary of State, Stuart Eisenstadt, that helped us to pass a law in the Congress which overcame the objection of the State Department, and we were able to get the money from the account and give it to families of terror victims. We also found a house that belonged to the son of the Shah. Years ago, the son of the Shah wanted to become a pilot. His father sent him to Lubbock, Texas, where they have a big Air Force base, and bought him a house. After the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the Iranian government confiscated the house. It belonged to the Iranian government. We learned about it. We took our judgment against Iran, went to the sheriff in Lubbock, Texas, and asked him to force a sale on the house. The sheriff sold the house and gave us $1 million towards a family of terror victims. Today, we have liens on buildings in New York, in Queens, and in 655th Avenue in Manhattan, waiting to be sold, and the profits will be given to the terror victims. And if you're talking about the Islamic Revolution in Iran, let me tell you an interesting story. After the Islamic Revolution, a lot of people tried to escape from Iran. Many Jews tried to cross the border from Iran to Afghanistan using the messengers and the activists from the Jewish agency. These people were walking all the way to Turkey for 4 days, and from Turkey they were taking a plane to Israel, United States, or any other country in Europe. In 1994 and 1997, 12 Iranian Jews that tried to cross the border from Iran to Afghanistan disappeared somewhere along the border. The Jewish agency representatives said that they never got in touch with them, they never found them. So the families went to the Iranian government to seek for information, but the Iranian government refused to give them any information. The families went and visited every jail in Iran. They went to every police station in Iran. They visited every hospital in Iran, asking if anybody knows what's happened to their sons, to their husbands, to their fathers, but nobody gave them any information. After some years, the families left Iran. Some of them moved to Israel. One family moved to LA. A neighbor of the family that moved to LA came to them and told them that while back in Iran, he was dealing with Evin prison, the major prison in Tehran, trying to sell them a land. In the course of a business deal, he was invited to the jail to take a tour to learn what the needs of the prison are. He came to the jail, he took the tour, he was accompanied by one of the guards who took him along, and towards the end of the tour, they went downstairs 10 floors below ground. When they reached the 10th floor, the neighbor saw a very dark cell. He approached the gate, and he suddenly recognized some of his neighbors that disappeared some years before. The boy was very excited. He thought that finally somebody came to rescue him. He approached the gate, but the neighbor was very afraid, didn't say a word, and took a step back. In the end of the tour, they went upstairs, 10 floors up, and the neighbor, who couldn't hold himself, very carefully asked the guard, who were the prisoners that he saw in the dark cell? And the guard told him that they were Jewish prisoners who tried to escape from Iran. So now we know that these 12 missing Iranian Jews might be alive, sitting in a jail in Iran, have been tortured, and we needed to raise public awareness for the case. We filed a high court petition in the Israeli Supreme Court, urging the Mossad to go and inquire what's happened to these missing Jews. After a year long, the Mossad came back to court and said that despite all their efforts, they could not find any information about the missing Jews. So our next trial was to file a lawsuit in the United States against Iranian official. But in one condition, according to the law, we needed to catch the Iranian official in the United States and serve him with a lawsuit. So one day we hear that the former president of Iran, Mohammad Khatami, is coming to the United States to be a speaker in the UN. We had good connection with the Persian community in LA, who got a hold of his itinerary, and we saw that the next night he's going to be a speaker in a dinner that was held for him by CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations. We learned that for $400 you can buy a ticket for the dinner, and for additional $400 you could buy a photo opportunity with Khatami. So we hired a process server for Virginia, an ex-policeman. We gave him the lawsuit plus $800. $400 for the dinner, $400 for the photo opportunity. He came to the dinner along with his wife. His turn to take the photo with Khatami arrived. He stood near Khatami, handed him the papers, told him that the families of 12 missing Iranian Jews are suing him in court. Khatami took the papers, and the photographer took the photo. The professor and his wife did not stay for dinner. Khatami had 20 days to answer the lawsuit. He failed, and now we're waiting for the Virginian court to come down the decision. When the court will rule and give a judgment against Khatami, we know that he has assets in Germany, in France, that we might try to go after them. But this wasn't the reason why we filed the lawsuit. We filed the lawsuit to warn Iranian officials that once they leave Tehran, there will be courts, there will be process servers, there will be lawyers that will indict them for their crimes against the Jewish people. When Israel's enemies realized that they cannot beat Israel militarily, that a conventional weapon does not help anymore, that despite of 7 wars they launched against us and horrific wave of terrorism they unleashed against us, we are still here. They started to use a different type of weapon, a brand new one, a very devastating one. It's called BDS and lawfare. They call people and companies from all over the world to boycott Israel, to sanction the Jewish state, and to divest from it. They want to isolate the state of Israel. They want to alienate it. They want to put pressure on Israel to consent to the demands of the Palestinians. They are calling all the 5 million refugees to come back and settle in Tel Aviv, in Ashdod, in Haifa, because their goal is to have a solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is a one-state solution, a Palestinian state. One of their attempts was the Gaza flotilla. In May 2010, anarchists from the BDS movement decided that they are going to breach the sea blockade that Israel had over Gaza. The reason they did it was to have a confrontation with IDF soldiers on the high sea. They wanted to show in the media how the IDF soldiers from the Navy is going to fight civilians who was trying to come with boats to Gaza. So they rented a very big boat, a Turkish boat. It's called the Mavi Marmara, and gathered 500 pro-Palestinian Muslim extremists, and they were sailing towards Israel from Turkey. When they reached the extraterritorial water of Israel, the Israeli Navy asked them to stop. The Mavi Marmara refused. They told the Israeli Navy, "You Jews, go back to Auschwitz." Then the Navy sent helicopters to the air and let Navy SEALs climb down with ropes into the bottom of the ship. The Navy SEALs were unarmed because they thought there were civilians on the boats. When they reached the bottom of the boat, they found terrorists from the IHH terror organization, which had knives, metal poles, guns, who almost lynched to death the soldiers that went to the boat. It was a bloody fight, which ended with the death of 10 of the terrorists and 9 of the IDF severely injured. That caused a disaster to the state of Israel. Not only in terms of PR, they kept showing over and over again these pictures of the IDF soldiers beating up civilians. But in terms of foreign relations, Turkey threatened to break up relationship with Israel, and under pressure of President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israel almost paid $20 million to the families of the terrorists that got killed on the boat. And Turkey went and filed a war crime complaint against the chief of staff and the IDF soldiers that were on the boat, issued arrest warrants against them, and asked Interpol to make these arrest warrants international. So the next year, these pro-Palestinians wanted to repeat this success. But this time not with 1 boat, but with 15 boats, and not with 500 Muslim extremists, but with 1,500. They gathered all type of celebrities to support them. They got the sister-in-law of Tony Blair. They got famous authors like Alice Walker. They got European Parliament members. They got all these people waiting to set sail towards Israel, this time not from Turkey, who learned its lesson, but from Greece. We in Shurat Hadin did not want it to happen again. We do not want to wait until there is another confrontation on the high sea between IDF soldiers to the pro-Palestinians. So we were thinking what we as lawyers can go after where all the boats need in order to sail. What can we legally block and not give it to the boats? And we came up with this idea of maritime insurance. No boat will sail without maritime insurance, and even if the boats themselves don't care, no port will let any boat to leave without maritime insurance. So we sent warning letters to all the maritime insurance companies in the world. There are not so many of them, only 30. And we told them that if they insure the boats who are participating in the flotilla, they are aiding and abetting a terror organization. Because the end goal of the boats is to help Hamas in Gaza, which is a designated terror organization. And if they provide any type of services to a terror organization, they are risking civil liability and criminal liability in the United States for violating the Anti-Terrorism Act. The first company to answer us was Lloyd's of London, who said that indeed Hamas, the designated organization in Israel, United States, Europe, and Canada, they have no intention to insure the boats. And if we give them the international maritime number of the boats, they will cancel their insurance. What the anarchists were doing, were going to places like Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, buying boats, bringing them to Delaware, in Delaware, registering them under new names, like the Audacity of Hope, like Freedom to Gaza. But the only authentic thing that was left was the International Maritime Number. We went to the Navy, we asked them for the numbers they knew. They gave us the numbers, we forwarded them to the insurance companies, and after a couple of days we read that the 6 of the boats are canceling their participation in the flotilla because lack of insurance. Then we asked the Navy what else we can go after. We wanted to go after the GPS, their telephone communication services, their internet coverage. The Navy told us that all of these services are called satellite communication services, and in the Middle East are provided by one company. It's called Inmarsat. We were happy to hear that it's only one company, but not so happy to hear that they are located in Dubai. When we looked at them in the internet, we found that they have actually offices in London and Miami. So we sent warning letters to Inmarsat as well. Inmarsat ignored us, so we took them to court. We filed an injunction against them in the court in Miami. And 2 days later, we read in the New York Times that the biggest boat on them all, the Mavi Marmara, is pulling out of the flotilla because lack of insurance and other communication problems. Then we got a hold of Governor Rick Perry, the governor of Texas. Governor Rick Perry heard me in one of his visits to Israel. After my speech, he came to me and said, I love your work. I love what Shurat Hadin does. It's an amazing work. If you ever need my help, please don't hesitate to call. And you know us Israelis, we don't hesitate to call. So we asked Governor Perry if he'd be willing to send a letter to the Attorney General of the United States, asking him why he doesn't go after those who raise funds for the flotilla in the United States. Because this is a violation of the Neutrality Act. The Neutrality Act is a very old law. It was legislated in 1789. It's an anti-piracy law. Where the boats were coming from the Netherlands and England, go down to the Caribbean, they were attacked by American pirates. So the American government legislated a law that prohibits American citizens or anyone only in the United States to take part in a hostile act against a friendly state to the United States. and specifically prohibits people in the United States to take part in a naval expedition against a friendly state to the United States. Israel is an ally of the United States. Governor Kerry sent the letter. It was published all over the media that now the Attorney General of the United States is going after those who raise funds for the flotilla in the United States. And lastly, we contact a law firm in Greece. We ask them to demand the port authorities in Greece to go and check every one of the boats if they fit to sail, if they have maritime insurance, if they have satellite communication services, and to check their voyage form. We learned that according to the Greek law, every boat that wants to leave Greece has to fill up a voyage form. In the form, they have to indicate which port they are leaving and what port they are going to. And we know that none of the boats can fill in their destination, Gaza, because Gaza did not have a port and it was illegal to travel to Gaza. So when the port authorities went and checked the forms, they realized that everybody filled in their destination, Alexandria, Egypt. This is a fraud on the port authorities. The port authorities impounded all the boats. That afternoon, the anarchists held a press conference in Greece saying that because of this lawfare organization, Shurat Hadin, who spreads lies against them, they don't have a choice but to cancel the flotilla. And lawfare. In September 2012, the Palestinian Authority went to the UN and upgraded their status to an observer state. They did it, and they keep saying it, that the reason for doing it is to be able to sign the Rome Treaty in order to become members in the International Criminal Court to indict Israel for war crimes. They keep threatening Israel that if Israel does not consent to their demands, they will indict Israeli officials and IDF soldiers for war crimes. They have two allegations. One, that the IDF soldiers have been using excessive force in their operations against the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. And the second allegation is that Israel violates the international law by breaching Section 49 to the Geneva Convention. You can prevent the Palestinians from going to the international courts. You can, however, deter them. We realize the jurisdiction of the international court is a two-sided street. Once you become a member in the international court, you can become a plaintiff, but you can become defendant as well. And what the Palestinians did during the Intifada is the war crime. Suicide bombings, killing tens of people in a systematic way for many, many years, drive-by shooting, ambushes, shooting missiles, thousands of them on a daily basis towards civilians, is a crime against humanity. It's called genocide. So we are working on drafting complaints against the leaders of the Palestinian Authority, warning them that if they dare and approach the international court and become members, we will be waiting for them there. Their other allegation is violating Section 49 of the Geneva Convention. The Geneva Convention was legislated after World War II. after Germany took over parts of Europe and transferred its population into these occupied territories. They had a transfer of 2 million people. So Section 49 of the Geneva Convention prohibits occupying country to move its population into the occupied territories. The Palestinian claim that what Israel is doing in the West Bank by encouraging Israelis to go and live in the West Bank, building houses, universities, hospitals, is violation of Section 49. We know that Judea and Samaria are not occupied. They never were occupied, they will never be. Because Jordan never owned these territories. They did not have a legal right which was recognized by the international community. And in any event, in 1988, Jordan gave up its right over Judea and Samaria. The Palestinians also never owned Judea and Samaria. The Palestinians are not a people, they are not a state, therefore they don't have a right to own any part of land. So it's basically a no one's land. All you can say about the territories is that they are disputed territories, but they are not occupied. However, we know what Europe thinks about these territories. We know that they consider them to be occupied territories. We know who sits in the International Criminal Court, how biased the judges are. We know how criticized they were by taking only cases of fights between tribes in Africa, why they are not taking more sexier issues. And there is no sexier issue than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We also read the op-ed piece that the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court wrote in August, where she encouraged the Palestinians to bring to her court war crime complaints that were committed in Gaza during the last war. So if the Palestinians will file a war crime complaint against Israel in the International Court, Israel will lose. And this is going to be a game changer. Israel will be sanctioned for not obeying the law, for not arresting the Israeli officials and the IDF soldiers and bringing them to trial before the International Criminal Court. We were thinking what we can do. And we realized that Israel is not the only country in the world to be blamed for occupying territories. Turkey occupies northern Cyprus. Russia occupies Georgia. Morocco occupies Western Sahara. So we went in June to The Hague and filed a war crime complaint against the first country, Turkey, for occupying northern Cyprus. We detailed how Turkey encouraged its population to settle in northern Cyprus, how they build houses, they build universities, they build hospitals, they give tax incentive to the population there in order to encourage them to go and live there. That's exactly what Israel is doing in the West Bank. The court will not indict Turkey. They will not convict them for war crimes. The most the court will do is say that they are not getting involved in occupying territories conflicts. It's for the countries themselves to resolve it between themselves. So when the Palestinians will come and file their war crime complaints against Israel, the court's hand will be tied. There will be a precedent stating that the court is not getting involved with conflict between countries over occupied territories. This is is only a portion of the cases we're handling in Israel, United States, Europe, and Canada. Every day we get more and more calls from more and more terror victims who want to fight back, who are seeking justice, who more than anything else in the world don't want to be victims anymore. And we are dedicated to help them. Just last week, I met with the parents of one of the teenagers that was kidnapped and realized that the whole kidnapping cost $60,000 for the kidnappers to buy 2 cars, 2 M16s, and 2 pistols. That's all it took. They got the money from El Noor charity in Gaza, was funded by Hamas, and kidnapped the teenagers. Then I met with the parents of the small baby that got ran over by a terrorist. They were waiting 2 years to have this baby. Terrorism did not come to a halt. We are dedicated to help these parents to fight back. We established Rat Hadin, Israel Law Center, to take all these hundreds of cases and file them in orderly manner in the courts around the world. It's a non-profit organization. All donations are tax deductible. You can help. We are dedicated to fight terrorism in court because we are doing what governments are unable to do. Governments cannot sue other governments. Governments have political restraints. They have foreign relations they have to take into consideration. They have international treaties that are signed off. They have to be politically correct. We don't. We are private lawyers who represent private people that have one goal: to bankrupt terrorism, one lawsuit at a time. We will fight terrorism in court because we can win the cases. We're doing it because we are winning the cases. We are taking the money from the one who perpetrated the attacks and give it to the one who deserve it most, the terror victims. We're doing it because we don't have any other choice. We live in Israel. We want to send our kids to school and to make sure they're coming back safe. We want to ride our buses. We want to sit in our cafes. We want to shop in our malls. We don't want to send our kids to fight down there in Gaza. They're only 20 years old. We don't want to run to the shelters 3 times a day, some of us 9 times a day. We want to live safely in our country. And yes, this is our country. This is our country not because the UN partition plan, or not because the Balfour Declaration, and not even because the Peel Commission. It's our country because of the oldest book of them all, the Bible, because God gave it to us. And we have a right, a religious and historic right to live in the land of Israel. It belongs to the people of Israel. We are sick and tired going with parents to the Abu Kabir Forensic Center and helping them identifying their children's bodies with dental records, like happened in the Jeep with the 7 soldiers in the recent war. We are sick and tired going to funerals and watching little children saying Kaddish on their parents, and even worse, watching parents saying Kaddish on their children. But mostly, we are sick and tired sitting in the military courts, watching the defendants from the Hamas who are looking at the judge's eyes, smiling at him and promising him that they will win. They will not win. We will win. because we are fighting for our national survival. The Torah taught us, "Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa." Don't stand idly by our brother's blood. I will not stand idly by our brother's blood. I cannot afford it. The state of Israel cannot afford it. The Western world cannot afford it. You cannot afford it. Thank you very much.
¿Es del discurso ella? Es discurso. Perú, pero fuerte.
Se ve que sí. Bueno.